Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar that we're co-hosting today with our partners, DMPG. I am delighted to really have these amazing speakers here today with us. And we're going to be talking in the next 45 to 50 minutes about really the, cookieless future, the changes, and really how to prepare for GA4. Before I will try to sort of give proper introduction to our amazing speakers today, I will let them introduce themselves. So, Charles, can you kick things off, please?
Good morning. I'm Charles Barsley. I'm the head of analytics at Selfridges department store. I've been there for just over 9 years now, working with Tealium and Google Analytics for most of that time. Currently in the midst of a Google Analytics 4 implementation, as I'm sure many of us are.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Charles. Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Morse. I'm the Senior Analytics Manager for New Look. We similarly are a new Tealium client, so are looking at implementing Tealium and kind of what our next steps are for GA4 as well.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Steve.
Hi guys, yeah, Steve Carrod, Managing Director of DMPG. We're a specialist consultancy working with data collection, data activation. So I've been working with Google Analytics since 2009, working with Tealium since 2013 as well. So in that sort of 9-10 year tenure, pretty much seen and done as much as you can imagine. So hopefully be able to impart some form of wisdom today.
Well, I've seen the content, right? So I think definitely we'll have great content for the audience. I'll go quickly last before I will hand it over to you, Steve. My name is Robin Geyer. I'm head of value engineering here at Tealium. We really try to figure out with our partners, our prospects and our clients what the ROI and the value of the technology is. So I'm very much looking forward to this talk track. And Steve, how about you actually kick things off and sort of give a quick introduction here on, sort of the cookieless, what has been happening in the past and sort of where we're going into.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as Robert said, I really want to give a bit of context to this whole discussion, right? So this concept of a cookieless future, it's quite a big headline grabber, right? It's kind of like instilling fear in a lot of people. But what I wanted to do was actually talk about the context of that. What does that actually mean? What does cookieless really mean in terms of the different types of cookies that are available? And then we can look at what the solutions are, kind of what the impact is going to be on different businesses, and yeah, talk about that in some context to GA4 as well. And of course, yeah, speak to Chris and Charles about their experiences as we go through this. So context. Let's have a look at this. Let's just have a look at the history to this. So one of the big things we've got here is GDPR. Okay, so this is something that's been around for a couple of years. It doesn't specifically focus just on cookies. This is all around how businesses collect data, how they process data, what they use it for, what kind of permissions they're getting from their customers. It is a big, wide-ranging policy, right, that has taken really a good number of years to manifest in terms of what we see today. And actually what we do see today, what a lot of people understand GDPR to actually mean and what they see is cookie banners, cookie consent banners. But it is far more than that, right? It's all the underlying data collection underneath that. And really what that did is essentially create a lot more scrutiny on essentially data owners, businesses, brands, advertisers, etc., on the type of data that they were tracking, what they were doing with it. So in addition to that, sort of in parallel, what you've got is Apple piping up as being the kind of advocates of privacy, right? So they are kind of taking this position, at least outwardly. And by the way, you're gonna get a lot of opinion from me. This is, make your own judgments on this, but you'll hear a lot of opinion from me about Apple. But they are putting themselves forwards as the advocates of privacy in the form of intelligent tracking prevention. Now, this went through various different cycles, different kind of levels of restriction on what you could do with a cookie, sort of what kind of information you could track. But ultimately where it landed from version 2.3 onwards was really this sort of situation with Safari, where it was viewed that it absolutely killed third-party cookies and also massively clipped the wings of first-party cookies, right? So now in Safari, from ITP 2.3 onwards, third-party cookies pretty much dead. You have to go into the settings and go and click a couple of things to expressly actually accept third-party cookies. So that's pretty much dead. And they put a restriction on first-party cookies, JavaScript first-party cookies, such that you can only retain that information for a maximum period of 7 days for a standard JavaScript cookie, or up to 24 hours only if you're doing passing information through link decoration, right? Which a lot of people were doing when they were passing, say, CIDs between domains for Google, for example. Then, in parallel to all of that, you've got Google coming out from an advertising perspective, probably because of a lot of pressure from regulators. I'm not necessarily sure this was entirely their intention, but now them sort of saying that they are going to deprecate the support for third-party cookies from 2022, from 2023, from 2024. Who knows? Maybe it'll be 2025 in 6 months' time, right? It's clear they don't really want to do it, but they also accept that it probably is something they're going to have to do. So you've got kind of these three kind of really big changes going on, and actually from a kind of explanation in the industry and kind of what people are writing about, there's a lot of focus on it being paraphrased, right, as death of cookies, or thinking about cookieless. Now, in combination to all of this as well, so all these kind of regulatory technology changes, what you've also got is you've got the pandemic, right? So this is a global phenomenon, right? And what it caused a lot of people to change their shopping behavior and move it online, right? So we saw a huge shift. We certainly saw this across all of our e-commerce clients, but there's some stats on this. I think it was something like a 20% growth, which is what you'd normally expect to see in 3 years, in like a 3-month period or something, when the pandemic took hold and people were moving their shopping habits online. Now, a lot of that has stayed online, and therefore actually there is a greater focus on that kind of online behavior and understanding people's behavior across different devices, across different browsers, etc. So you've now got this kind of fourth behavioral component, moving more towards a customer or user-centric way of looking at all of your data. And of course, that quite nicely plays into what has been going on from a GDPR perspective. And really what we should be doing, right, is really thinking about the customer first, not thinking about how we can just mine their data, but really putting them actually first and foremost, and thinking about what we provide, what value we provide for them. So you've got all these things going on, right? But let's look at, so that's the context. Now let's look at sort of the reality of the situation and kind of what's happening. Now, we did a study last year, so a little while ago, and actually what we found is during that study, there's still a huge reliance on third-party cookies. So what appears to be happening at the moment is that there is this kind of, I think it's partly confusion, partly concern, actually, that people don't necessarily want to make a change to then have to make another change to then make another change, right? There's a lot of altering scenarios in the industry. There's Google coming out one day and saying they're going to kill third-party cookies. 5 minutes later, they're going to extend the lifetime of that. So part of it, I think, is concern over not making the wrong decision and having to backtrack and sort of do regret work, essentially. But you've still got this very, very large number of people who are reliant on third-party cookies. But what we want to do now is actually sort of have a look at what does this mean? Kind of what are the options? What should you be considering? And how is this going to work, right? So in answer to the question, will cookies actually exist? Is it really the death of all cookies? Well, will they still exist? Yes, actually, you know what? They are still going to exist. But, and it's a really big but, right? This big is what we've got to remember is it's only going to be certain types of cookies used in certain types of ways, okay? So what does this really mean for businesses? So let's have a look at this. So really, the kind of cookies that are going to be left on the table are going to be first-party HTTP cookies, or some people might refer to them as server-side cookies, right? And what that is, it's still a first-party cookie. It's still, a little bit of code that tracks a bit of information that sits on your browser, but the way in which that is populated is very different to a third-party cookie, very different even to a JavaScript first-party cookie, right? JavaScript first-party cookie can be generated by a bit of script that's injected onto the page. The HTTP cookie is a lot more secure, it's a lot more reliable. It requires actually that essentially server-side request to be either generated by a business or to be working with a partner to kind of create that request to serve into the browser, right? So it's from a security perspective, it's about as secure as you can get from a cookie point of view, right? And it's why Apple has not included HTTP cookies in their ITP restrictions, right? So you can use HTTP cookies on your site and not be restricted to a 7-day window, right? That is a perfectly acceptable ITP mitigation method. What this means for businesses is that they really need to be thinking about a server-side collection as a whole, right? So yes, the first part of this is right. Well, actually, we need to be thinking more smart in a more smart way about our cookies and the way we generate our cookies, the partners we work with, how that information is actually used, how it's shared, all that kind of fun governance stuff. Absolutely, that is the first thing they need to be thinking about. But then obviously the second thing is server side. We need to be thinking about tracking accuracy, getting around kind of ad blockers, making our data collection a lot more robust for us as a business, but also making that more reliable for our customers. We also need to be thinking about sign-in, sort of going back to this point about GDPR and kind of really making it clear what we're tracking, for what purpose and why, what kind of value we're creating for our customers. Thinking about that in a positive way, I know that's difficult to do sometimes, but thinking that in a kind of opportunistic way, positive way, well, actually, this gives us the chance to have that conversation with customers to say, look, this is the kind of information we want from you. This is why we want it from you. This is what we're going to give you back, right? So instead of just trying to collect everything as much as you can up front, right, keep it light on the upfront information before they provide authentication. But when they do provide authentication, ask for a lot of the different things that you need from them about their email address, their purchasing habits, date of birth, all that kind of stuff. If you've got a reason to do it, if you've got an actual value exchange that you can provide for that person. And then sort of playing this all back into advertising as well, like how are we going to use all of this first-party data to drive advertising accuracy? Again, there's an opportunity here in that previously with a lot of third-party data, yeah, you could get a lot of coverage, a lot of expanse, on targeting people in different locations, but the level of accuracy of that, I was seeing ranges of like 20 to 30% accuracy level on targeting. And I think that was being optimistic. So actually, this gives us the chance to become a lot more accurate with our media targeting and advertising and get much greater efficiency on budgets as well. So going back to this point, seeing a lot of people wait, but actually, is that the best thing to do? Should we just wait? Well, no, is the short answer. But the sort of longer version on that is actually, if you sort of take that approach to thinking about, looking at your HTTP cookie first, thinking about server side, thinking about media accuracy, actually acting now, even if you have to adopt a hybrid approach where some things are done using client side, using still old cookie methods, and some things are done server side using and then using HTTP cookies, you're still going to get a huge gain in doing this, right? Even just switching to an HTTP cookie, for example, if you've got a user base of 60% Safari users, which is not uncommon for quite a lot of retailers, e-commerce businesses, you're going to get much greater attribution accuracy on 60% of your traffic. Right, just by taking that small action, it doesn't cost you anything to switch to an HTTP cookie. It just requires a little bit of engineering knowledge, right? Which we can send a document about afterwards, and it's easy to do. and you could potentially be saving millions in terms of how you're attributing your revenue and therefore where you're optimizing your budgets. Secondly, thinking about the sort of the server side data collection, you could be missing out on 10, 15, 20% of your data by not sending it server side, by being, cobbled by ad blockers and other kind of just scripts that are running on the page, slowing things down. That's a huge amount of data to be losing, where in a world where actually people are moving more online, that kind of experience that you provide for customers is becoming a lot more important, a lot more valuable. Actually moving to a server-side capacity, that could increase accuracy levels greatly. We've seen, for example, customers who move to the Facebook CAPI API method of tracking actually get a 15% uplift in conversions, right? And actually being able to use that data to optimize their media campaigns. And then again on accuracy of data for the purpose of customer stitching, right? If you're in a digital transformation program, which a lot of people are, kind of moving more towards a customer journey centric way of speaking to your customers, well, to be able to do that in a more accurate fashion, having the ability to actually stitch your customers more accurately across devices, across browsers, that's something you need to create that level of accuracy. And for example, customers that we work with who are doing those kind of personalization strategies are seeing huge incremental, like total incremental, not just single test, right? Huge incremental uplift on the work that they're doing there. So there is a long path to this. There's going to be changes. There will be things that you might have to change, but absolutely you can start now. You should start now, because there are huge gains to be made by doing so. And then just sort of rounding this out before we get on to Charles and Chris, broadly speaking, what we see is businesses take one of two routes, right? Route one, which is the kind of minimum table stakes approach, is thinking about the accuracy of the data. So thinking about HTTP cookies, thinking about server side, right? Doing the basics. And really they often do that for really a kind of more marketing performance optimization, right? Getting return on investment on marketing spend, improving accuracy of data for that purpose, right? This is real minimum table stakes kind of stuff. And actually where the GA4 conversation lends itself quite well, and where we'll get into it a bit more detail, right? That's kind of the direction that GA4 is wanting to go into, right? Becoming more accurate, becoming, looking at more of a kind of server-side model eventually, right? More sort of putting it around the kind of user-based model as well, when they're doing that for the purpose of, really media optimization is kind of their biggest goal, right? So that's kind of minimum table stakes. The sort of second route, which some people are doing, where we see some huge gains, but is not necessarily relevant for every single business, is where the actual longer term solution here is to, yes, do route one, HTTP cookies server side, but then actually be thinking about a strategy that is focused on the customer, a customer-centric approach to collecting the data, managing your data, and then being able to, in real time, be able to orchestrate your customer journey so that the right message to give to that customer at the right time based on their interaction, whether that be online, in any particular browser or any device, or even in store, right? That is a route that the sort of a second route that a lot of customers are taking, and are actually really being pushed towards faster because of these changes that are happening in the industry. So I've been doing a lot of talking. I'm going to try and do much less talking now. So really what we wanted to do is, hear from Charles, hear from Chris, kind of like, what are you seeing? For example, what kind of ITP mitigations, is happening in your businesses? Let's start there perhaps, as that was one of the first areas we were talking about to kind of focus on. So Chris, I think you guys looked at, is it the Facebook CAPI route as sort of one of your mitigation methods? Do you want to just talk to us about that a little bit?
So we found some challenges in terms of the matching relationship between the data that Facebook were kind of seeing coming through and the data we were seeing coming through. So we actually took the opportunity to leverage the Google Cloud services and implement Facebook CAPI server side. It was actually a lot kind of simpler than we expected, although I definitely can't take credit for doing the work. But the match rate we saw as a result of that went up significantly. We did have a couple of small niggles in terms of like hashing email addresses and depending on what type of hashing you use and which service, trying to get those things to match. But once we kind of managed to get around that, we found a massive uplift in the kind of value we were able to drive from that.
Was it kind of like double-digit kind of percentage change in terms of accuracy, or are you actually talking about sort of literally value in?
Yeah, in terms of accuracy, definitely double-digit. We went from basically Facebook coming to us and saying, "Look, your accuracy is really poor. You're not getting value out of this," which is never great when you have a partner come to you with that. To kind of them going, "Yeah, now you've got a really good match rate now." So we're kind of iteratively, obviously, working through how we drive more value out of that. But a lot of it is kind of automated or as part of standard kind of optimization. So actually the work from marketing teams, once that fix was put in place, was minimal, but still drives more revenue.
Yeah, okay. So in that vein then, given those kind of gains that you've seen on the Facebook side, do you think that having that kind of server-side approach and sort of having that as a something that you scale over time, is that really the kind of direction that the business is going in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know we'll talk a bit more later around kind of what the future of server-side looks like, but we are not alone, I suspect, in that as a business we're still using third-party cookies. We've got lots of third-party script and code that we load. The maintenance of that is huge, let alone the accuracy and the validity of it all. Moving to a model where actually we use server-side to streamline a lot of the code we put on the site, but also give us much more control over it and much more flexibility in how we integrate with other partners. It's something I've been excited about for a while and I'm very much looking forward to.
Okay, so then I suppose that lends a question to thinking about moving much more towards server side, that being kind of like a key feature of the direction that you're going to take. And this question to Charles as well, is GA4 actually the next logical step for universal analytics, or how much should perhaps businesses be considering alternative solutions, right, which are purely event-based, designed to be server-side really from the ground up, or have been for the last few years? Should they perhaps be considering those kind of solutions, or perhaps they're like a dual running of this?
It's an interesting question. I think the clock's running on GA, and there's less than 12 months now to move away. So for many, I think moving in, implementing GA4 is what they can do quickly. But I think it especially starts as you embark upon a re-implementation project, makes you think, is this the best way we can be doing things? How can we improve? And there's several sort of pull and push things in both directions. So you'll get that continuity moving from GA3 to GA4, that you understand it. The key terms are fairly familiar, although some have been recalculated. We're looking at how can we be best in class when we implement GA4. So we're looking at that server-side approach in Tealium Event Stream, and how can we make sure that when we implement something new, we're not just introducing tech debt, but we're moving forward. On the same extent though, Google are doing some pretty interesting things that do make you question, should we be using our own data warehouses and doing our own analytics collection? So firstly, Google Analytics 4 is tightening the data retention period. So I believe it's 2 months now by default, or 14 months is the maximum you can set it to in the admin. So if you've been running a business over time, even in just a year and a half of having GA4 live, you'll lose that ability to trend backwards and look at some of your fine-grained data unless you implement their BigQuery exports and then do your analysis in BigQuery. So you've got to kind of ask yourself then, well, if I'm doing all my analysis in BigQuery because that's where I own my own data, do I need GA4 in the first place to collect and orchestrate the data? Or is in my company, could I do that better and use a more custom database where I can orchestrate things so that they match the shape of my business rather than trying to fit into a Google Analytics 4 box? I don't think I think it's probably a hybrid. I think there will always be uses for Google Analytics, and it works so tightly with the rest of the Google marketing platform. But certainly, we're looking at what more we can do in our own data warehouses, especially just to get over sampling in Google Analytics as much as anything else.
Yeah, we've got a lot of Google Analytics customers, many of which are moving to GA4 as well at this point in time. But then we've got another tranche of businesses which are kind of really trying to figure out, is that the right thing to do, as you say? And actually what they're doing is they are looking at their options and thinking about, right, well, actually, is the value we get from that connection, right, with Google and Google Analytics and a Google network really going to be what we need to have going forwards? Because of course there is that direct connection. You can't then connect out to other advertising networks directly from Google Analytics, and actually is the better solution to have more of a pure event-based analytics system, run your own BI on top of that, but then use like a real-time CDP type of solution for the data activation across multiple channels, one of which is Google Ads. But that's just one, right? You want to go to Facebook, you want to go to Affiliate Window, you want to go to, other demand side platforms. Oh, and by the way, Apple have just announced they're going to have their own demand side platform. Very privacy conscious they are. So there could be a lot of benefit to taking that kind of parallel approach, Charles.
And I think that goes to what you say about sort of moving server side and orchestrating your own data. Then you can see a sort of single view of your customer that you're pushing out to each of those advertising networks, rather than the legacy approach of just putting everybody's client-side tags onto your site, and every advertising platform having a slightly different view of your data based on when you implemented it, how well it's implemented it, or how it natively calculates metrics.
And I think even to that point, I think it's quite interesting that you also mentioned Google Marketing Platform. And I wonder, especially, right, Steve, you just said Apple is looking for people who can build a DSP. Google Marketing Platform with the likes of DV360, and I've worked for many years with DV360, right, giving the possibility to buy on so many different SSPs as well, right, and not just sort of on sort of Google's display network. And you said, right, everything works so well with GA4. I would actually want to challenge that and see what, like, is that really the case moving forward, or is that just another walled garden where DV360 is going to give us more possibilities in terms of targeting versus Google Ads, which is very automated now? I think that's going to be interesting, right? Like how much, especially if you say GA4 is such a big lift also right now to transition, is that the best logical step to do? Because we've seen customers now go to a platform where they can sort of build a visualization of their data and then just use that as their analytics, versus saying classical, whoever the analytics platform is, without calling names, right? But is that the added value on top of it still for GMP, without trying to say GMP is bad or anything, right? I love working with the systems, so no questions added there, but it's the orchestration that should come before, right? And then activate into it, versus having it sit in analytics and then trying to sort of do all of that from an analytics perspective.
Yeah, it's a tricky equation, isn't it? I mean, we see from an analytics solution perspective, and yeah, we won't name any names, but what we typically see is analytics solutions that are either focused purely on the data collection side, so event-based data collection for you to determine performance and kind of create visualizations of in real time business performance. And then you have analytics solutions which are far more focused on actually taking that data and activating in real time across other solutions, right? So putting it into email, putting it into on-site testing and personalization, putting it into retargeting purposes in a sort of more of a platform suite kind of way. Google, I think, they're in a possibly a slightly tricky spot, because they're kind of in between the two. right? They do a bit of that and a bit of the other one, but not completely of that and not completely of the other, right? Because they activate across the Google platform. And therefore, at the moment, what we are seeing quite much more of is a dual run strategy where people are running Google Analytics and they're using that for activation of data directly in a Google network, but then they're also looking at other analytics solutions that they can create a more kind of customer journey centric view of their performance and be able to activate that across not just different advertisers, but different customer touch points as well. And it'd be interesting to see how that pans out over time. If people then, keep running that dual strategy, but move more towards, something that's not purely Google focused in that activation. Factor that with what's going on in Europe from a GDPR perspective, particularly France, Italy, and Austria. Google are having a real rough time, a really rough time. And interestingly, I think they recently announced they're going to have like a single tag logic, which handles analytics and advertising. So they're kind of bundling those up together. So it'd be interesting to see what play they do make in the European market, particularly, and sort of how much influence they have in that market versus the UK and the US as well.
Totally. And I think from a GDPR perspective, because you just called that out again, and Chris, you mentioning that you already see double digits just from an attribution perspective, right? So one of those major value aspects, if you look at server-side tracking, is giving sort of the sort of as much as the data back to the activating systems as you can. But also, Steve, you mentioned it in your presentation, right? Login or sort of ID collection beyond sort of a cookie, and you mentioning also, Chris, like you already passing hashed emails onto the respective activation systems. So you as New Look are following that sort of guideline of, okay, we need a login strategy moving forward in order to make sure that we get as much accuracy as possible. Because I actually see that not happening enough right now if we look in the market and what we're about to face.
Yeah, I mean, hashing emails has been around for a long time in a lot of, I think, more kind of your data platforms like your DMPs and things, but actually it's something that's not necessarily that difficult to do front end as well. And actually by doing that front end, it allows you to stitch your data much more robustly across other systems without kind of violating any privacy errors. And in a world where, we're kind of trying to work out how we track people more robustly without invading privacy, it just kind of seems like the no-brainer. The tricky bit is obviously how you get customers to log in. And I think to your point earlier, Steve, it's that kind of almost quid pro quo of, we don't just try and pressure you to log in, like how do we provide value? And that might take the form of, a wish list or beneficial targeted promotions or other sorts of things in that space.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's very interesting.
Absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead, Steve. Apologies.
Yeah, no. It's what I'm also interested to know actually is, bearing in mind, those kind of, you mentioned GDPR again, is bringing that up and the kind of impact that has on the industry and on the way we handle cookies, right? Thinking about this cookieless concept. The UK have now come out and said that they're looking to actually soften the GDPR regulations in the UK. And I'm just wondering, what sort of approach do you think that will have for your businesses? Are you going to have, a one-size-fits-all kind of approach to GDPR? Are you going to have it by market? Is that just going to create even more complication in what's already quite a complicated space? Be interested to hear, without any kind of legal implications from you guys, but just, generally what your thoughts are on those changes there.
I think a big part of it will be whether you're international or not. So we do have a small international presence. As a result, that means we would have to have different setups in different countries by region. I think actually the implementation of that is not necessarily as complicated as it seems. You determine the country you're serving and you offer cookie consent, and they select that, and then you adhere to the options they select. I think the more challenging question is actually, can you correctly identify the country or the audience you're serving all of the time? Because if you get it wrong, the onus is likely going to be on you to take the blame for that effectively, not, oh, well, the customer didn't set their country properly, so it's their fault.
I think with the server-side setup as well, it gives us so much more fine-grained control over what we can deliver. So rather than just dropping a vendor tag on the site and them scraping the page or pulling in whatever they want, certainly with the server-side implementations we've seen, I've been impressed on how you can specify every field that you're sending to the vendor. It's very auditable and governable. Definitely the part where I say I'm not a lawyer, so it's difficult to forecast the future on how the industry moves forward legally. But I think it's about having that control over your own data, and whether that's doing everything first party, using CDPs to then understand where you've got consent and drive it out forwards, or whether that's still using some of the legacy client-side tags. I think we'll be seeing a lot of vendors having to move their tech to enable server-side connections and enable that much more fine-grained control, region by region, or sort of customer or based upon that customer consent.
Yeah, that's fair. That's what we see as well across our customer base. Actually, is that there is that view to do things correctly by market, right? Whether it be in California, whether it be in Germany, whether it be in the UK. There's definitely that. Actually, where what we're seeing is more of an impact on the kind of international aspect is the impact of Brexit is having on sort of relationships, cross-border relationships, taxation, and all that kind of stuff, and that's actually causing people more to consider whether they continue operating in certain markets. Actually, less so than the tech industry piece. Sorry, Robin, you were going to say?
No, and I find that interesting, because if we talk internationally and GDPR being so complex, and I'm by far not even an expert, right? So, but would you then see, or do you see, and this is open to everybody now, that there is more collaboration than already between the different teams if we think about IT, marketing, and legal? Because if I remember back in my times when I was still campaign managing, right, and then trying to explain to my legal teams the difference between first and third party cookies, that was already a struggle. Now we're talking GDPR. Now we're talking about the nuances of UK GDPR. We're talking German GDPR, France, Austria, Italy. Like at some points, like it almost sounds like we need to have all these teams combined now, because otherwise, like, we don't even know what we can do anymore, outside of just relying on data, relying on legal telling us what to do, and then having marketing sort of put it forward. So do you see that moving closer together already, or is that still something where we need to be much more proactive? And if we look inside businesses to say, hey, you need to be talking to these guys much more regularly now, because, right, just looking at the scale of it today.
Absolutely. I think we've already had those teams working very closely together over the last few years. But I see in the industry, gone are the days where there's this free tag that will give us some heat maps or something. Let's just throw it onto the website. There's a much more rigorous process that we, and I'm sure all the industry, go to say, what third parties are we working with? What data are they collecting? Where is this data being stored? You kind of need to do the homework to really understand and do right by your customers to make sure that you're morally using their data in the right ways for which you've told them.
I think as well, it can be really important to make sure that every business has a really strong data protection kind of officer, and the governance in place within the business and the processes to adhere to that, because naturally human beings vary, and actually in a lot of teams, when you've got marketing teams live off of customer data. Without it, they can't market effectively. So they're not necessarily actually incentivized from their team to do the right thing all of the time. Whereas actually, if you've got that strong governance at the top of the organization saying, well, actually, look, here are the fines we can get, here is the risk we're exposed to if we don't do the right thing. Actually, here is the legal jargon and helping to communicate that understanding of what is okay and what isn't okay, which is definitely not clear to those of us that are experts in the industry, let alone those that aren't.
Yeah. And do you think, Chris, just to quickly stay on that point, did that help in the conversation for you to actually decide to go server side now, right? Because as you said, you just recently became a customer of ours, which is really great, right? But sort of thinking now about sort of the process and sort of highlighting to management that this is something that we do, like what were sort of some of the key areas that you think helped get that across to say, okay, because it's still very foundational, right? Like if we think about orchestration and personalization, you have those use cases, you can do cart abandonment, you can do suppression, like that is an immediate impact towards ROI, whereas server side, the move to GA4 analytics is such a foundational technology within the business. So what do you think sort of convinced your management to take the route and spend that money as well?
If I'm being honest, I think we probably, let's say, framed the conversation differently for different leaders within the organization. So when we're talking kind of from a marketing perspective, as we already discussed, actually moving server side enables you to capture more data more robustly. So actually, that's a really strong selling point. It helps with marketing return on investment, everything else. When we're talking to some of our more legal governance process-driven teams, obviously it's a lot around that governance, that control. The fact that Tealium kind of has built-in cookie consent management, so we don't need to pay for a third-party tool, so it's cost saving. And actually then when we've kind of talked to some of our other technical teams in like product and engineering, actually the ability to kind of sell on making things more API driven, more integrated, more accessible, that's also a really big selling point for us, where a lot of our systems at the moment, I'll call it out and say it, some of them are a little bit archaic. They're quite legacy systems and they don't always integrate and play nicely with each other. So that kind of more API driven infrastructure is definitely what we're aiming for.
So that's really great feedback, because I think, right, making sure that you address individual stakeholders in the right way is such a crucial way. Considering time, I think this has been a really valuable conversation. I've just checked if we got in any questions from the audience, and we did actually. So just cautious though that we don't overblow time. I want to highlight one which I think is really interesting, and maybe Steve, you could sort of answer that, but of course open to everybody. But sort of really the question is, trying to make architectural changes in our organization is really difficult, right? So how would you prioritize these changes we need to make versus the value we would get from them?
Yeah, okay. So I'll start this, but actually I'm gonna steal some of Chris's answer actually in answering this question, because in the context that I went through initially, we spoke about kind of a 3-stage process to kind of like why you wouldn't wait, right? Why you get started now, and in there, what I said was, you should go for HTTP cookie method first where you can, then go server side where you can, and then you start building out that kind of customer-centric model around your data. Sort of take that approach. So going HTTP cookie first, that is a quick win. It really is. In a lot of vendor instances, they have an ID service that you can request in a server-side capacity to bring back an ID, to store that on a browser, and that will be an HTTP cookie. You will get immediate benefit there, and the range of that benefit will depend predominantly on the number of Safari users you've got and the typical intent to purchase cycle, right? So if you've got a very high Safari browser user and your intent to purchase cycle is typically longer than 7 days or up towards that area, you're talking big gains in terms of your level of attribution and accuracy tracking. Go there first. Easy win. Secondly, it's going to be the server side piece, and this is a bit more complicated. It requires often requires more technology, right? So maybe a Tealium event stream, something like that. You have to put a bit of time into actually creating, the schema that then gets distributed on the server side. But, to Chris's point, if you create the narrative for the correct audience in the correct way, it's actually quite an easy sign off to have, right? Legal governance, cost saving, marketing benefits, they're all there. It's just that each team is only going to be interested in a certain component, most likely, and therefore structuring that narrative in that way is the right thing to do. The third one is the much harder one, right? Is thinking about this in that kind of customer-centric approach, thinking about journey orchestration. So not necessarily customer acquisition and customer retention and looking at it as two, like a binary method. It's actually thinking about every single interaction you have with that customer, regardless of where it is, and trying to create a unified experience and not have, the email team claiming, that they created that sale, or the PPC team saying they created that sale, or, whoever, saying they created that sale. Trying to coordinate teams in that way is a lot harder, but actually where some huge gains to be made. But that has to be both a top-down and bottom-up approach, right? It needs to be bottom-up from the people who are delivering it. Generally, you don't get, that's where you need that unity, but you have to have the top-down direction from really the senior leadership in the business to allow a platform whereby people are not competing for individual KPIs, right? Everyone needs to be thinking about the customer as a whole. That is a heck of a lot harder.
And that is such an interesting topic, because that incentivization, if you look at OKR or KPIs, I think that is such a tremendous change an organization has to go through to also get rid of this. You got to get the lowest CPS, CPO, whatever you want to call it, for your marketing channel. That's the only KPI I'm going to give you as a marketing manager, right? Like, and I see you nodding, Chris. So if you want to touch quickly based on this, please feel free, because even that is something where we're really also trying to help and navigate with our customers to say, hey, this is not a world that we need to facilitate, right? You need to make sure that you look at your company's conversion, your company's revenue versus the individual marketing channel if we want to strive for cross-channel personalization. Is that something you are doing, Chris?
Something we're trying to do. There are some good examples, but a lot of businesses might have similar things where, for example, one of our core business KPIs is drive more app downloads, right? We know that customers that download an app are more valuable. It's logical, it makes sense, but obviously also the challenge with that is if you're driving more app downloads, then you're potentially cannibalizing from your other channels. So you've then got another team that you're potentially incentivizing to try and not drive app downloads because they need to drive activity via another means, and you end up kind of causing almost conflict within teams at a professional level, whereas actually what you want to do is find ways to align teams. And I think some of the way you do that is by making sure that your measurement and your data enables you to answer that in the right way, rather than, driving app downloads. How do we drive omnichannel customer value? Because actually, whether they download an app is irrelevant. Whether they spend more money with us over time, that's the thing that we really care about. So we might have some measurement that helps to inform the direction of travel for that, but we should be targeting teams based on actually what we want to drive overall as a business, not isolated targets.
Yeah. Which actually leads me, Charles, anything you still want to add to that question? Or I think we have, yeah.
I think going back to the question of how can you get business sign off for big projects or the difficulties there, I would try to break it down. You may know your end goal and your end vision, but are there some steps you can take to get a foot in the door? So it sounds like when it came to server side, Chris had the Facebook CAPI server side tag, and that was what got them onto server side. It was similar for us. We were doing an affiliates review, and we said, well, if we're going to implement new affiliates, a new affiliate program, let's do this properly. And that was our opportunity to sell the business on server side. And now that we've got that server side capability, why wouldn't we do Facebook? Why wouldn't we do Google Analytics 4? Because we've already got that capability now. So it's sort of, what's the small business case that's almost a proof of concept you can use to get that technology, get the familiarity, go through the painful process of learning a new tool, and then the world's your oyster, and you can just roll it out from there.
Incremental value gains, right? And actually having that proof. I can't advocate enough about that, having gone through this process with a couple of clients, some of which have tried to go and eat an entire elephant in one go, and it hasn't worked. Not the same elephant, but we showed before a different elephant. But they've tried to go for the whole thing, and it's been a really painful process, right? Really painful process that's actually caused even staff attrition, right, because of frustration within the business. So it has to be that kind of incremental change and proof, so that everyone can look back and go, yes, this is why we did this. This is why it released the next tranche. So yeah. Very much agree.
I guess particularly for retail, with such a annual cyclical thing, if there's something you can do that's going to improve Christmas this year, that's going to be a much stronger business case than saying, I've got this project, but it's going to take 2 years till we land it, and it's going to do 100 different things.
Totally. And since it's not just Christmas anymore, right? We have so many days that we want to focus on, especially in the retail sector, which, if I'm quickly going to share a couple of slides again, I think this is especially something we've been talking about, and every of you kept mentioning it, right? We need to future-proof our investment. We need to improve data control because there's too many different regularities out on the market, right? And then, of course, also data-driven experience that drives value. Since we're at the end of the time, I really want to make sure that we give you a couple of call to actions from this, and how we really want to make sure we support. And maybe, Steve, can you share a bit of things here on sort of, right, the DMG planning aspect here, especially looking at the 3 different bullet points that we just highlighted on the slide?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things we've been doing a lot with clients recently is taking a look at their kind of entire data collection approach. What is their customer? Do they have a customer-centric approach to this, and how does their data collection match that customer-centric approach to kind of journey orchestration? And helping them really think through what is our plan, right? And going back to that kind of, what do we do first? What kind of value we get from that? What kind of business justification can we make from that? How do we get to that progressive change across the business to have joined up KPIs? That's what we've been working a lot with customers on, to try and actually put a plan around that, and how they can progress towards that, but immediately drive value from these changes, right? That's such a big thing to focus on within the work that we're doing. That's what we're kind of offering here, is to say, look, come and talk to us. Let us take a look at your business with you. Let us bring our collective years of experience across multiple clients, and build a plan for you guys, right? If you guys want to go off and do it yourself, great. If you want us to help you, even better, right? But that's your choice.
Yeah. And you mentioned value, right? So one thing I want to really highlight here is, especially from a tech perspective, right? Understanding the value is so crucial. So for everybody on this call that, wants to learn more around what, server side contracting can do for you from a value perspective, not just from GA4, but Conversion API, Meta. If we talk about TikTok, we mentioned Affiliate. So for the likes of Avon, get your own business value assessment. Go to tealium.com/value, fill out a couple of questions. It'll only take you a couple of minutes, right? And then, in conjunction, I think that could be a very strong foundation for the next steps that you need to take in your business. Well, thank you so much, all. This has been really, really great. Have a great day, everybody who's on this call now. Enjoy. I hope you had great takeaways. We'll plan a couple of follow-ups afterwards, so have a look out for that. And again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Steve, Charles, and Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks, everyone.